Usually, when you get a medical diagnosis, like, say, you break your arm, there's this very clear expectation of precision. You go to the hospital, they put you in an x-ray machine, and that film shows a jagged white line. The doctor points at it and says, there it is, that's the fracture.
Yeah.
It is entirely binary. It's either broken or it's not.
Yeah, it's visible, it's categorized, and honestly, it's comforting. I mean, human beings have built entire civilizations around that kind of explicit, measurable precision.
Right. But the moment you step out of that hospital and into the modern world of, well, human thought creation and artificial intelligence, that x-ray machine basically shatters.
Sure.
We are no longer looking at clean, jagged lines. We are staring at a landscape that is fundamentally murky.
Extremely murky.
And that brings us to the core of today's deep dive. We are unpacking a truly fascinating presentation by Dr. Christophe Delong and Kinexa Formation. It's titled The Era of Incomplete Thought. And I want to jump straight into the deep end by posing a mind-bending question directly to you, the listener. Think about this. What if, for the very first time in human history, you no longer had to actually finish your thoughts to create something coherent?
It's wild to think about because it completely flips everything we understand about the creative process on its head. Dr. DeLong and Kinexa Formation are pointing out a shift that is silent, almost taboo in a lot of workplaces, but it is entirely redefining language and thought itself. To really grasp the stakes here, you have to realize that for centuries, precision was viewed not just as a technical requirement, but as a moral and intellectual virtue.
Oh, absolutely.
And now we are transitioning into an era where human blurriness isn't a flaw, it is actually the necessary starting point for creation.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that concept goes against literally everything we are taught in school. If you think about the traditional rule of creation, thinking meant moving from the blurry to the clear. If you were a structural engineer, an author, or, I don't know, a software developer, the burden of translation was entirely on your shoulders.
Right.
You had to have a complete vision and know every single explicit step of your reasoning before you took action.
And if you didn't have that explicit knowledge, you simply couldn't create. You couldn't just stand in front of a computer in, say, 1995 and say, make a spreadsheet that tracks my budget and looks nice. You had to master the technical exactness to bring that idea into reality. You had to learn the syntax, the formulas, the formatting.
Yeah, your rigor defined your competence.
Exactly. But what Dr. DeLong's presentation argues is that artificial intelligence has fundamentally broken this obligation. You no longer have to move from blurry to clear on your own. You can provide a blurry intention, a feeling, an emotion, maybe a rough sketch, and the AI will extrapolate, guess, and structure that blur into a highly usable result.
I want to make sure I really understand how this works mechanically, because it sounds almost like magic. The source material talks about a specific symptom of this shift. I think the presentation calls it, wait, what was the exact term they used for coding?
They refer to it as vibe coding.
Vibe coding.
Right.
And it is probably the most spectacular illustration of moving from explicit instructions to implicit feelings.
Okay, vibe coding. What does that actually look like in practice? Like, how do you code with a vibe?
Well, let's look at the mechanics of classic coding first. If you wanted to build a simple button on a website, you would have to give an exact instruction. You write the code to specify, draw a rectangle 100 pixels wide, 50 pixels tall, with a hex color code of FS000.
Which is red.
Right, red, that is rigorous. Every single parameter is specified by the human. But vibe coding completely abandons those mechanics. Now, you open a prompt and tell the machine, I want a button that feels warm, soft, and catches the eye without being aggressive. You are describing the emotional resonance of the object, not the geometry or the syntax required to build it. And the machine somehow maps warm and soft to the exact pixel dimensions and hex codes.
Precisely. It translates the abstract human vibe into the concrete structure. You are delegating the precision entirely to the machine.
Okay, I have to push back a little here. When you frame it like that, my immediate thought is that this sounds like a massive crutch. Is this just turning us into lazy bosses who dictate vague memos? Like, I just kick my feet up on the desk, tell the AI, hey, make a cool app that makes me money, and wait for the magic to happen. Because if I'm just throwing vibes at a screen, it feels like I'm not really doing any of the actual work.
It's a very common reaction to think of this as laziness, but it's actually the opposite. Dr. DeLong's presentation is adamant that this is not a magic shortcut for a lazy mind. He compares this new role to art direction, or conducting an orchestra.
An orchestra, okay.
Think about a conductor. They don't physically blow into the trumpet or bow the violin. They aren't producing the technical sound. But if a conductor stands in front of a symphony and just wildly waves their arms with no internal vision of the music, what happens?
You just get a wall of noise. The musicians are playing, but it's a mess.
Exactly. The orchestra, or in this case, the AI, will simply amplify your lack of direction. If you have a fundamentally empty or contradictory thought, the AI will just structure your emptiness into high-definition nonsense. It might look like a polished website or a well-formatted essay, but it will be devoid of actual utility or soul. So the real modern skill is no longer technical precision. It is clarity of intention.
Ah, I see. So I don't need to know how to write the specific lines of Python code, but I need to possess a profound capacity to formulate what I want that code to achieve. I have to know the domain well enough to adjust, correct, and refine the AI's output when it inevitably misses the mark.
That's the crux of it. You have to know what good looks like. Your intellectual labor shifts from the heavy lifting of construction to the high-level work of orientation and evaluation.
Which brings up a really uncomfortable reality about the actual output we are accepting. If we aren't the ones placing every brick and we are relying on a machine to guess our intentions based on a vibe, the end product is rarely going to be a masterpiece, right? The presentation is pretty explicit that we are entering the era of good enough.
It is, and that is a very hard pill for traditional experts to swallow. When you delegate the structuring to an AI, the output on the first try is almost never perfect. It lacks the subtle genius of a master craftsman. But, as Kinexa points out, it is highly functional, and in our current economic landscape, functional is usually all that is required.
The real-world examples they give in the text really ground this concept. Think about the photos you take on your smartphone today. They aren't perfect, professional-grade compositions shot on 35mm film, but the AI in the phone adjusts the lighting and focus enough that it documents the moment perfectly. Or think about the automated emails AI drafts for you at work.
Yeah, they aren't literary masterpieces.
Right, but they convey the project updates effectively. An AI-generated pitch deck might not win a graphic design award, but it gets the prototype in front of investors by 5 p.m. The first draft has essentially become the final product.
And what's fascinating here is that because that standard has shifted to good enough, we are seeing a fascinating sociological reaction in the workplace. We are relying heavily on these tools to complete our thoughts, to write our code, to structure our messy ideas. But we've developed what Dr. Delong calls a silent omerta.
An omerta, like the mafia's code of silence, that is an intense way to describe office dynamics.
It sounds intense, but observe your own workplace. There's this immense collective embarrassment. Everyone is using AI to augment their thinking, but we all sit around in conference rooms pretending that we aren't.
Oh, wow.
We present a highly structured report to our boss and pretend that it didn't start as a deeply blurry, incomplete thought typed into a prompt box at 2 in the morning. We are actively participating in a massive cognitive revolution, but it remains entirely unavowed.
Why are we hiding it, though? If the output is functional and it saves us hours of laborious structuring, why doesn't everyone just openly admit they are using it? The Kinexa presentation dives into the psychology of this, and it seems rooted in a deep fear of losing our identities.
It's fundamentally about the collapse of traditional hierarchies of competence. Let's look at the established experts first. For decades, their entire professional value, their status, and their compensation were based on their rigorous precision. They were the ones who knew how to place every single brick.
Right.
Now, a machine can replicate that precision based on a 22-year-old intern's vibe. Where does that leave the senior expert?
Terrified of becoming obsolete.
Precisely. They feel devalued. On the flip side, you have the beginners. They are terrified of being judged as frauds if they admit they didn't manually write every line of code or every paragraph of the report.
Yeah, the imposter syndrome must be wild.
It is. And hovering above all of this are our schools and corporate structures, which are completely unadapted to this new paradigm. They still evaluate, grade, and promote based on the old rules of explicit precision. So because the system hasn't caught up to the reality of how work is actually being done, everyone just operates in this gray zone, advancing in silence.
Okay, let's take a major step back here. If this technology is forcing us to change how we evaluate competence, how we work, and even how we conceptualize our own thoughts, was this inevitable? Like, if we trace the history of artificial intelligence, was it always destined to become this blurry, vibe-translating, good-enough machine?
That is perhaps the most important question we can ask, and the answer is a definitive no. The source material reveals a massive, often misunderstood economic compromise in the history of tech. We tend to assume that large language models, the LLMs we use today like ChatGPT, are simply the smartest, most advanced form of AI that science could possibly conceive.
Right, we assume this was just a straight line of progress. But the presentation points out that there was actually a fork in the road. We could have gone on a totally different path with AI, couldn't we?
We absolutely could have. Historically, researchers were heavily invested in something called logical or symbolic AI. These were systems built on explicit, formal rules. You literally programmed the machine with human logic like, if A happens and B is true, then deduce C.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they were essentially incredibly complex decision trees based on deductive reasoning.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If they were based on actual logic, why didn't we stick with them?
Because they were incredibly brittle, slow, and devastatingly expensive to build. You had to manually encode every single rule about the world into the system. If it encountered a situation outside its specific rule set, it just crashed. There were also experiments with conceptual AI, which tried to build systems that could manipulate actual ideas and concepts rather than just data points.
Yeah.
But ultimately, LLMs won the race.
And they didn't win because they were the most logically rigorous or the most conceptually profound. The presentation is clear on this. LLMs won because of economics. They are incredibly scalable, relatively cheap to deploy once trained, and highly profitable at producing that highly functional, good enough text. We basically traded deep, explainable understanding for a cheap, scalable model of statistical imitation.
That is a very stark way to put it, but mechanically it is accurate. And this brings us to a really heavy philosophical point that Kinexa brings up to explain why natural language ended up being the perfect interface for this statistical imitation. Dr. Delong invokes the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein.
Okay, bringing 20th century philosophy into a conversation about neural networks, I love this. How does Wittgenstein explain an LLM?
Wittgenstein famously argued that meaning is use. To put it simply, the meaning of a word isn't some invisible magical property attached to the letters. A word's meaning is defined entirely by how people use it in everyday life. Now look at how an LLM works mechanistically.
Right. When you ask it a question, it is not searching a database for the objective truth of a word or concept.
Exactly. It doesn't know what a word actually is. It calculates the most probable sequence of tokens or word fragments based on billions of examples of how humans have historically used those words together.
So if I type the word apple, the machine has no concept of a crisp red fruit that grows on a tree. It just mathematically knows that the token apple frequently sits next to tokens like red, eat, and orchard in its training data. It is literally manifesting Wittgenstein's theory. The machine's entire universe is just calculating the probability of use.
Exactly. And Dr. Delong layers another philosophical concept on top of this to explain why the AI feels so convincing to us. He brings in John Austin and John Searle's theory of speech acts. The core idea here is that saying is doing.
Meaning, when we speak, we aren't just passively describing the world, we are actively trying to change it.
Right. When a judge says, "I sentence you," they aren't just describing a sentence, they're enacting it. When you speak to a colleague, you might be reassuring them, commanding them, or instructing them. You're performing an action through language.
Yeah.
And this is the crux of the illusion with AI. LLMs do not understand a single thing they are generating. They have zero inner life.
Wow, zero inner life.
But they have been trained on so much human data that they perfectly imitate the effective meaning. They mathematically know how to arrange words so that the output sounds incredibly reassuring or highly structured or deeply technical. They produce the effective sense without possessing any actual sense.
I have to stop you there because this is where a genuine sense of existential dread starts creeping in for me. If we accept that the machine doesn't actually understand anything, that it is just a statistical parlor trick designed to predict the next word, and we are relying on it to structure our thoughts, write our code, and draft our communications, aren't we just degrading our own intelligence? Like, if we are learning to communicate in vibes just because that's what the statistical parrot responds to best, aren't we dumbing ourselves down to meet the machine halfway?
That dread you are feeling is incredibly common, and it is a completely valid concern. It's actually the central crisis that Kinexa Formation is trying to address. They don't just view this as humans using a tool. They describe what is happening right now as a cognitive coevolution.
Cognitive coevolution, meaning it's a two-way street. We aren't just shaping the AI is actively rewiring human cognition.
Yes. Because this model is so ubiquitous, accessible, and economically profitable, we are subconsciously adapting our human creation process to match the machine's architecture. We are losing the muscle memory for rigorous, solitary structuring, and we are learning to think in sketches, to speak in broad intentions, because that is the most efficient way to interact with the LLM. We are co-evolving with a statistical probability engine.
And that rewiring process sounds exhausting, honestly. That connects so many dots for me. If our brains are being forced to co-evolve with a fundamentally new way of processing language and thought, it completely explains the massive wave of workplace fatigue we are seeing right now. It is jarring to change how you think.
It is deeply jarring, and it triggers a very real physiological stress response. Kinexa points out that there's this constant suffocating fear of obsolescence in the modern workforce. People feel like they are drowning because everything is changing too fast. They feel like they have to become prompt engineering masters overnight or they will lose their jobs. And the tragic irony is that this tech-induced stress literally blocks your ability to learn. When your nervous system is overwhelmed by anxiety, it clouds your executive functioning and destroys your creative confidence. You freeze up.
It's the classic deer in the headlights syndrome. You are so stressed about using the tool perfectly that you can't even formulate a basic thought. So what does this all mean? How do we cope with this? The presentation transitions here from diagnosing the problem to offering a lifeline. Kinexa's whole mission seems to be about deprogramming this specific stress.
They want to completely strip away the unnecessary technical intimidation. You don't need a PhD in machine learning to use these tools. Kinexa's goal is to help professionals build a healthy, autonomous relationship with AI. They advocate for stepping away from both blind, euphoric fascination and paralyzing panic and moving toward a balanced, competent use of the technology.
And to help people achieve that confidence, they synthesize this massive philosophical shift into a very clear, digestible formula. It's the visual model right at the heart of their presentation, which they call the productive incomplete thought. I love this concept because it gives you permission to not be perfect. Let's break down how this formula actually works in practice.
The formula splits the burden of creation into two distinct halves. In this new era, the human's job is strictly to provide the intention. You bring the emotion, the vibe, the contextual understanding of the problem, and the initial direction.
Right. And the machine's job is to take that raw intention and provide the structure, the coherence, the exact precision, the continuity, and the final completion.
When you combine the two, you get the productive incomplete thought. You no longer have to possess a complete, rigorous plan to be highly productive.
Let me see if I can put a concrete analogy to this to make sure it clicks. Under the old paradigm, if I wanted to build a house, I had to be both the visionary architect and the meticulous structural engineer. I had to sketch the beautiful design, but I also had to mathematically calculate the load-bearing capacity of every single wall, or the house would collapse.
Exactly. The burden was entirely yours.
But under Kinexa's formula of the productive incomplete thought, I am just the architect. I can sketch a radical, beautiful, blurry idea on a napkin, my intention, my vibe, and I hand that napkin to the AI, which acts as the structural engineer. The machine runs the math, figures out the load-bearing walls, and ensures the building actually stands up.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. The machine provides the physics, you provide the soul, and this represents a total paradigm shift for teaching, learning, and corporate training. The traditional model of education, where you spend years memorizing syntax, outlining explicit rules, and perfecting your technical knowledge before you are ever allowed to create something, is rapidly losing its center of gravity.
Because in this new paradigm, starting the process is fundamentally more important than planning the process. The rough sketch on the napkin is suddenly more valuable than the pursuit of technical perfection, because the machine can handle the perfection for you.
It highlights a major economic reality. Intention is the new raw material of human value. Expertise isn't dead by any means, but it has completely changed its nature. Being an expert is no longer about knowing how to lay every single brick perfectly. It's about having the profound domain knowledge to know what kind of building the neighborhood actually needs in the first place.
We are moving away from creation as a solitary, agonizing act of rigorous construction and moving toward creation as a continuous, fluid dialogue with the machine.
Human thought becomes a rushing fluid stream, and the machine acts as the banks of the river. It guides the water, structures it, prevents it from spilling into nonsense, and gives it tremendous force. But the water itself, the vital energy, has to come from you.
This has been such an incredible journey to unpack. If we synthesize the core message of Dr. Delong and Kinexa Formation's presentation, it really comes down to this. We are standing at a wild inflection point in history. We are the very first generation of humans who do not have to finish our thoughts in order to create something real and impactful. But the takeaway here is absolutely not that AI is replacing human thinking.
No, it is replacing the laborious mechanical part of thinking. It is offloading the heavy lifting of structuring, formatting, and syntax. And by removing that rigid burden, it theoretically frees us to do what machines fundamentally cannot do, to
Wow.
initiate, to imagine, to feel, and to orient.
To give things actual meaning rather than just the statistical effective meaning.
Precisely. I think it is vital for you, the listener, to internalize that what you are navigating at work right now isn't just a software update. You are witnessing and participating in a revolution of language and thought itself. But through all of this cognitive coevolution, the human remains the absolute origin point of creation. Without your intention, the machine has nothing to structure. It is just a massive, expensive statistical calculator sitting in a server farm waiting for a human vibe to give it purpose.
The machine is the continuity, but we are the origin. Which leaves me with a final, lingering thought for you to explore on your own today. We've established that the machine can handle all the precision, and your only job now is to provide the intention. But here's the real challenge. If intention is the new raw material of the economy and the true source of your value, how do you train your mind to cultivate deeper, more profound intentions rather than just lazily settling for the very first blurry thought that pops into your head?
That is the real work of the future.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive today. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.